What's going on, guys? It's Cimoooooooo. So today I'm bringing to you my top 5 competitive budget decks for the October 2018 format. Do you guys ever have a day where you wake up and you think it's a completely different day? Well, in my top 5 meta decks yesterday, I for some reason still thought it was September, so I just wanted to apologize for that. But today we're going to be talking budget decks. Now, the thing is, when it comes to budget decks, it is a very relative term. So for the purposes of this video, you're going to be able to acquire both the main and extra deck for all the decks we're going to be discussing for around $100 to $150. Now, that may sound like a lot, but when you look at it in the context of purchasing 3 copies of Sky Striker Engage or 3 copies of Impermanence for like $240 just for 3 cards, yeah, that's a lot of money, and you're going to be very happy that you're able to pick up and compete with a competitive deck for something that's only a fraction of the price. But before we get into it, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you don't miss a single upload. And if you guys really love these budget deck videos or any of the other content that I produce, then consider backing me on Patreon or becoming a YouTube channel member, because it's thanks to the support of those like Noramac and Gabenator that I'm able to continue bringing you content on a daily basis. So if you're interested, be sure to hit the join button down below or check out the links in the description. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into it. Starting off with number 5, I have Gemknight FTK. Gemknight FTK actually managed to secure a couple of top cut slots at the 200th YCS. And this is really cool because what I love about Gemknight FTK is, depending on what region you're playing the deck, you actually have a much higher probability, depending on the number of hand traps that other people are playing, for the success of this deck to increase. Now, the reason I say this is because in regions without summon sorcerers, Goki is not nearly as large of a threat. And the thing is, you don't have to play as many hand traps as you were previously, because when Goki was running around, you had to main deck so many hand traps so that you didn't get extra linked or basically just got shut out from playing the game. However, now that that's not the case for a couple regions where summon sorcerers isn't legal, there's going to be a lower hand trap count because hand traps aren't nearly as effective against the best deck being Sky Striker, and people are going to feel more safer doing that. So that gives Gemknight FTK the ability to shine, because if there's less hand traps, that means there's going to be a lesser probability of your opponent being able to stop you. And you've still got tools like Called by the Grave to stop your opponent's hand traps. You even have Magical Midbreaker Field, which shuts down a majority of hand traps in the game. I think Gamma is going to probably see a decline in play now that Goki is starting to fall out of favor in those particular regions. So that means you're only going to be susceptible to a couple of specific hand traps. But even so, Gemknight FTK can play through hand traps depending on the type of hand that they open. And just with that alone, being able to just win games for free is something that's really cool. Now, I don't necessarily condone FTKs as a strategy, but if you're looking for a really cheap deck that you want to take to a regional, or hell, even a YCS, there's a couple coming up at the end of the month, then this could be an alternative option for you if you just want to steal a bunch of wins and actually do rather well. The fact that it managed to top shows that this is a viable strategy, and even though it is a bit of a glass cannon, that doesn't take away from the fact that it's an FTK and it's something that can do very well if piloted by the correct player. So that moves us on to number 4, and for number 4, I've got Pendulum Magician. Now, Pendulum Magician also managed to secure a lot of top cut slots at the 200th YCS as well. It did take a pretty significant hit with Heavy Metal Foes Electromite going to 1, but it doesn't really take away from what the deck is overall trying to accomplish. It's still able to set up some incredibly powerful boards, and the fact that it has access to the rank 4 toolbox when it comes to Xyz or all the other different tools at its disposal gives it a lot of flexibility, because if you're going up against a deck, let's say, that has Graveyard Reliance, well, you can play Abyss Dweller in your extra deck and easily make it and shut down your opponent's plays if you're going up against, let's say, a Goki player or a Dark Warrior player or anything like that. Or, you know, Exciton just got newly unlimited, so if you're behind, you can just slam an Exciton down on the table and take control of that that game back. Or there's just so many different applications because of the fact you're playing a deck of all level 4s, so you have access to that toolbox, but you're also playing a deck full of spellcasters, which means you could tech something like Secret Village of the Spellcasters for your Sky Striker matchup to give you an edge and kind of just shut them down from being able to play the game. It's definitely a possibility. I don't know if people are going to experiment with that, but it was tested with in the OCG, so that just goes to show that the potential is there. I think overall, Pendulum Magician still has a lot of its consistency. It just lost a lot of its power with Heavy Metalfoes Electromite going to 1, but the deck is still very versatile, it's very strong, and it's incredibly budget. A lot of the cards you need for the deck are so cheap because they all came out of a single set, and that's good for you if you're looking to pick something up really cheap and just able to abuse the fact that you have the Pendulum summoning mechanic on your side. So just something to keep in mind, but that brings us on to our number 3. And for number 3, I've got Paleozoic. Paleozoic actually managed to take even more top cut slots than a deck like Pendulum Magician. I think Paleozoic shares a lot of similarities with a deck like Altergeist, but I think Altergeist is a little bit out of our price range for the budget. Now, it just depends on how you're able to acquire certain cards, but I kind of felt that Paleozoic fits better in this video because I feel that if you're playing Altergeist, Infinite Impermanence is kind of a staple just because of the interaction with Multifaker, where it's not as necessary for a deck like Paleozoic, but it is going to be a boon for you if you have access to it. Paleozoic does a lot of really good things well. I mean, it is a trap deck, but it's able to go first and second because of the way that the deck functions. Once it snowballs, it's able to generate so much advantage and really just take control of a game that it's very hard for an opponent to catch back up. And the thing is, we're starting to see a lot of spell and trap removal enter the format because Sky Strikers are starting to be one of the better decks. And one of the advantages of Paleozoic is that all of the cards are really chainable, so you're able to capitalize on all of this removal by making your opponent waste their removal and just gaining advantage from that and making them neg incredibly hard. So that's really cool. You've got access to so many different tools like the Frog Engine. Totally Awesome is still an insanely powerful card. There's just a lot of really good things that Paleozoic has going for it, and the fact that it was able to make several top cut slots at the 200th YCS, I think it made it as far as either the top 16 or the top 8 at one of them, so it goes to show it's able to compete toe-to-toe with Sky Striker. I think you need a grindy type deck to be able to go against it, and it just shows that a deck like this is able to perform, even if it's one of the more cheaper options that's available. But this brings us on to number 2, and I think it would be a sin if I didn't have this deck anywhere on this list, and that deck is Burning Abyss. Now, a lot of people were crying out for Burning Abyss to be on the top 5 meta decks of October 2018, but the thing is, yes, Burning Abyss did win YCS Mexico City. It got second place at YCS Utrecht. However, when it comes to Burning Abyss, there was only 1 or maybe 2 of them in the top cut, and even though they managed to win all the way out, that doesn't necessarily make it a meta deck. We saw this when Thomas Rose won the UK National with Burning Abyss. Yes, a lot of people started playing Burning Abyss, but did it do well? After Thomas Rose, not really. It didn't really take many top cut slots at all during the National or WCQ season, and that's just because it's kind of just this rogue contender that, yes, while it's able to compete, there was more representation for Burning Abyss in the overall field. It wasn't able to make it to the top cut, and that's ultimately what matters. So yes, while you might have seen a little more Burning Abyss here and there, if it's not able to make it all the way through, especially in large numbers, then that's a strategy that's obviously not doing too well. This is very similar to like when World Chalice won one of the European YCSs, and I think it was like the only World Chalice in top cut. And again, kudos to the player that made it that far, but does that make World Chalice a meta contender? Not really, because after that victory, we didn't see any uptick in World Chalice players, and we never saw it do any, just really nothing else outside of maybe getting 1 extra top cut slot, but it didn't do anything beyond that, so we just like to call those anomalies. However, Burning Abyss is still a very good budget option and matches very well against a lot of the top meta contenders because of the fact it's able to grind, it's able to go toe-to-toe with Sky Striker very well, but it has lots of flexibility because it can be very aggressive depending on the way that it's built with multiple BLSs or orbital Hydrolanders. Hell, you can splash Kaijus in. We saw that from the second place player in Utrecht, where you're basically locking the Sky Striker player out of the ability to play, then you just OTK them. I mean, that was pretty cool. There's a lot of really interesting ways you can go about Burning Abyss. You can just add floodgates in there and just flood your opponent out behind a wall of Dante or Beatrice. Like, there's a lot of cool things you can do, and for the price that Burning Abyss is, I think it's a very solid contender. Now, again, it doesn't have the highest representation, but I had to put it at number 2 on the list because even though compared to the other decks we've already previously talked about, it might not have had as much representation, the fact that it went all the way to get first and second at 2 of the largest YCSs we've had, I have to give credit to the deck where it's due, but do keep in mind that there is the possibility that it's not as good as a lot of people might think, but it's still a very strong deck nonetheless. Now, before we get to my number 1 deck, I did have one honorable mention, and that's Crusader. We talked about Crusader in last month's top 5 budget decks, and Crusader was like nowhere to be found in the top cut of any of these YCSs. However, I believe it either won a giant card or a mega regional, I believe in Utrecht, so that goes to show that a deck like Crusader is able to do something. So even though it didn't really have any representation, there was definitely some Crusader players in attendance. I think a couple of them were on the bubble, they just didn't make it all the way there, so it's kind of this fringe deck that does its own thing very well, very similar to something like Gemknight FTK, just in a going second form instead of going first, just not giving your opponent a turn. It's still a pretty decent deck, especially for the price tag, and if it's something you want to explore, I would definitely recommend it. I don't really think you could go too wrong, but that brings us on to our number 1 competitive budget deck of the October 2018 format. If you haven't already figured it out, it's True Draco. Now, I know that a lot of people are sick of True Draco, but frankly, with the amount of tops that True Draco has been able to garner, not only over this format, but the previous format, since there have been a lot of similarities between the two formats, I have to give it to Draco for what it's worth. I mean, the most expensive cards you're probably going to have to get out of here are like Card of Demise, maybe Ignis Heat. I know that's kind of on the rise because of the fact it hasn't had a reprint, but every other card in this set is incredibly cheap, and that's really good, especially considering you don't have to play an extra deck if you don't want to, and that really helps bring the price point of this deck down. And for what it's worth, this deck is incredibly strong for the value that you're having to put into it. I mean, you've got access to some of the most insane cards ever printed in the True Draco monsters and spells and traps because they each have several effects that make going first and going second very good. You've got access to some of the most powerful draw spells in the entire game for consistency, and then you're backed by all these amazing floodgates that really put a lot of pressure on your opponent and allow you to control the game in your favor. It's just a very solid deck, and even though Terraforming's at 2, it doesn't matter. 5 copies of Dragonic Diagram is still 5 copies of Diagram, and that card is even cheaper than ever thanks to its multiple reprints that we've had recently. So even though a lot of people may not like it, I gotta give credit where credit is due, and Draco, in my opinion, is well deserving of that number 1 slot. But guys, those are just my thoughts. Let me know down in the comments what you guys think about your top budget competitive decks for the October 2018 format. I'd really love to hear your thoughts. So guys, thank you so much for watching the video. Be sure to like the video as always, subscribe to the channel for more amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content, and if you really found this video helpful, consider backing me on Patreon or becoming a YouTube channel member, because just by showing your support in any way that you can, you're investing in my ability to continue bringing you amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. So thanks so much again, and we'll see you next time.